Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're diving headfirst into the world of Indian renewable energy.
Sounds electrifying.
It is. We're focusing on ACME Solar Holding Limited. They're prepping for an IPO, and we've got a mountain of documents to sift through.
Prospectus, financials, even a CRISIL industry report. The whole shebang.
Our mission, to understand ACME inside and out, and figure out what it all means for you.
It's like a home inspection before you buy, but for a renewable energy company.
Exactly. So first things first, who is ACME Solar Holdings?
Well, they're a major player in the Indian renewable energy scene, founded back in 2011.
Okay, so not exactly brand new to the game.
Nope. And they develop and operate those massive solar and wind projects you see popping up all over India.
So give us a sense of their reach. How big are we talking?
Right now, they've got 30,320 milliW of operational capacity actually generating electricity.
That's a solid base.
Yeah, but here's the kicker. They've got a whopping 2,220 milliW under construction, already contracted.
Wow, so they're really putting their money where their mouth is?
Oh, yeah. And there's another 8,810 milliW under construction that's been awarded. Serious growth, especially in a market as competitive as India's.
Talk about a growth spurt. So let's get to the heart of the matter. This IPO, why are they going public? What's the goal?
The prospectus tells us they're aiming to raise capital for a couple of things. First, paying back some subsidiary loans.
Makes sense. Clean up the balance sheet, look good for investors.
Right. And the second reason, the classic general corporate purposes.
Yes. General corporate purposes. Always leaves you guessing.
Well, the prospectus limits it to 25% of the proceeds, at least.
Still leaves some wiggle room.
True, but it is standard practice. The question for you, though, is how have they used similar funds in the past?
Spot on. We'll be keeping our eyes peeled for any red flags.
Absolutely. Now, we've got growth plans, debt repayment, and some general purpose spending. But do impressive projects translate to financial health? Are they actually profitable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let's crack open those financial statements. Revenue and expenses over the past 3 fiscal years. What story do they tell?
Okay, so in fiscal 2024, total revenue hit $14,662.67 million. But it's not a straightforward upward trend.
Oh, what's going on there?
They sold some assets in fiscal 2024, which impacted revenue, but they also commissioned a 250 milliW project in Rajasthan.
So strategic moves impacting the top line. Got it.
Yeah, and they increased capacity at their ACME Hirgar project, too. Lots of moving parts.
Okay, so revenue is a bit of a mixed bag. What about profitability? Are they actually making money?
Now, this is where it gets interesting. In fiscal 2023, they reported a pre-tax loss of $154.01 million. A loss. Yep. A pretty stark difference from the euro 1,024.26 million pre-tax profit in fiscal 2022. There's a story to unravel here.
From profit to loss, that's a roller coaster. What's driving that swing?
One big factor, financing costs. In fiscal 2023, they paid out a massive euro 8,090.97 million. That's a huge jump.
Ouch. All that debt must be taking a toll.
Yeah, likely tied to those big expansion projects we talked about, taking out loans to fuel growth.
Short-term pain, potential long-term gain. Classic high-growth scenario. But that brings up a critical point. Cash flow.
The lifeblood of any business. You can look great on paper, but if the cash isn't there...
It's a red flag. So let's check ACME's pulse. Where's the cash coming from and where's it going?
Well, the good news is their core operations are generating positive cash flow.
So the core business is healthy.
Yeah, in fiscal 2024, operating activities brought in $14,288.03 million, meaning they're actually making money from selling renewable energy.
That's reassuring, but they're still in the red overall. Where's all that cash going?
Well, a large chunk is going right back into investments. Mainly capital expenditures for new projects.
Makes sense, given their ambitious growth plans.
Right. They spent $17,246.73 million on investing activities in fiscal 2024. Shows commitment, but also a risk to consider.
What kind of risk?
Well, if those investments don't pay off soon, it could strain their cash flow.
So it's a balancing act, investing for the future while managing current debt.
Exactly. And they're using some cash to pay down debt, which is a smart move, but it's a delicate balance for sure.
It's high stakes, high growth. Understanding this financial dance is key for anyone eyeing this IPO. Now, let's talk risks. No investment is a sure thing. What are some of the challenges ACME faces in this wild world of renewable energy?
That's where things get really interesting. One of the biggest challenges for ACME, and something you really need to understand, is the regulatory environment for renewable energy in India.
Ah, yes, bureaucracy rears its head.
Exactly. The government incentivizes the sector, regulates it, which can be good, but
But policies can change, subsidies disappear, approvals get stuck in limbo.
precisely. And it's not just India's government either. The global push for clean energy creates opportunities, but also volatility. Remember that Crystal report? It highlighted how global trends impact the Indian market.
So they're juggling local bureaucracy and global forces. What else is on their plate?
Well, the competition in India's renewable energy market is intense. The Crystal report named some big players, like Renew Power and Adani Green Energy Limited.
A real battle royale for market share.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of acquiring land for new projects. It pops up repeatedly in the prospectus.
I can imagine. Securing vast tracts of land for solar and wind farms can't be easy. What else?
ACME relies heavily on power purchase agreements, PPAs, with government entities. These guarantee the government will buy their power, providing some stability.
Sounds like a lifeline.
It can be. But the prospectus points out these PPAs can have tough terms, experience delays, and even lead to penalties, like for project delays.
So they need the government, but it comes with strings attached. A complex relationship.
You got it. And it's key to grasp this dynamic if you're thinking about investing in ACME. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Time for the bigger picture. What about the Indian renewable energy market as a whole? Why should we, the average listener, care about what's happening over there?
It's fascinating, really. India is going through a massive energy transformation. Concerns about climate change and energy security are driving ambitious goals for renewable energy.
Okay, so they're serious about going green.
Big time. The Crystal report says as of March 2024, installed renewable energy capacity, including those big hydro projects, makes up a whopping 43% of India's total generation base.
That's a serious chunk of their energy coming from renewables. Impressive.
It is. And within that, solar is king, claiming 43% of the share as of March 2024. Over the last 5 years, they've added about 60 GW of solar capacity.
That's some serious momentum. So where does ACME fit into this boom?
That's the question, isn't it? How well they position themselves within this booming market will determine their long-term success. And they're clearly betting big on solar and wind, but the industry's always evolving. It is, which brings us to those intriguing details, those little nuggets that make ACME's story even more interesting. What have you found?
One thing that jumped out at me was the nominee shareholding structure of ACME Cleantech, their main promoter. 5 individuals each hold 5 shares, but as nominees of this corporate entity. Not necessarily a red flag, but it's unusual.
Interesting. What else?
The prospectus gives specific examples of penalties ACME has paid for project delays. One subsidiary had to cough up $82.07 million for a delayed tax deposit. Shows the financial risk of relying on those government PPAs.
Yeah, small things can snowball when we're talking millions. Anything else to share?
Well, I stumbled upon a little tidbit about an employee resigning as CFO on a leap day. Adds a little human touch to the story.
It does.
And on a more positive note, the Crystal report mentioned that module prices actually fell in 2023, making solar projects a bit more affordable.
So a potential tailwind for ACME as they expand. Okay, we've covered a lot. ACME's background, the IPO, their financials, the risks, and even the Indian renewable energy market as a whole. But let's bring it back to our listeners. Why should they care? What's the takeaway for the average person?
You know, ACME's story is a glimpse into this global energy transition. India's push for renewables makes them a major player, and ACME is right in the middle of it.
So their story helps us understand this larger global shift.
Precisely. By understanding ACME's journey, their challenges, and their opportunities, you gain insights into the dynamics of this crucial sector.
Whether you're an investor, a policy wonk, or just someone who's curious about the future of energy, this matters.
Absolutely. It's not just about one company. It's about how we power our world. Now, before we move on, I always like to leave our listeners with a final thought, a question to spark their curiosity. ACME is betting big on solar and wind, the current stars of renewable energy. But what about the future? Emerging technologies like green hydrogen are gaining traction. Could this be ACME's next big win, or will they miss the boat?
Green hydrogen, it's certainly generating a lot of buzz.
It is. So the question is, will ACME adapt and become a player in this new space, or will they be left behind? Something to ponder as we continue our deep dive. You know, thinking about ACME's focus on solar and wind, It just hit me that this could actually be a big advantage in that green hydrogen race.
Really? I wouldn't have thought of that right away. How so?
Well, consider how green hydrogen is made, right?
Yeah.
Electrolysis, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen,
Yeah.
and what powers that whole process? Renewable energy.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. ACME's solar and wind expertise could be a real asset if they decide to go all in on green hydrogen.
Exactly. They've already got the know-how for project development, grid integration, all that.
That's a steep learning curve they've already climbed.
Right. And the timing could be perfect, too. That Crystal report, the one we keep coming back to, it mentions that green hydrogen investments are booming globally.
So they wouldn't be jumping into the unknown.
Nope. But of course, green hydrogen isn't some magic solution, is it?
No, definitely not. Still a new technology. We've got the cost issue.
Costs need to come down, that's for sure.
And the infrastructure. Producing it, storing it, transporting it, it's all still under development.
Absolutely. But any investment has that risk-reward calculation, doesn't it?
It does. And ACME's track record seems to suggest they're not afraid of new tech.
They're definitely not shy about trying new things. Remember, they're already exploring battery energy storage systems.
They are. Several projects in the works, in fact.
It shows they're not stuck in their ways, willing to adapt and diversify.
Speaking of support, let's not forget the Indian government's commitment to renewable energy. It seems like ACME has a pretty good relationship with them, securing all those power purchase agreements, the PPAs.
True, although we did touch upon the potential downsides of those agreements.
The strict terms, potential delays.
And penalties, yeah. But overall, the government's commitment to renewables creates a pretty favorable environment for companies like ACME.
They've got the wind at their back, even if they hit some rough seas along the way.
Nice analogy. And it's not just the government either. Consumer demand for clean energy is on the rise in India.
People are becoming more aware of the environmental cost of traditional energy.
They are. And they're actively looking for alternatives.
So there's a market ready and waiting for what ACME is offering. But the prospectus does outline some specific risks. Maybe we should dive into those a bit.
Definitely. One that pops out is their reliance on just a handful of suppliers for critical parts.
Oh, right. Solar modules, wind turbines, that sort of thing.
Yep. And if that supply chain gets disrupted,
Like those supply chain issues everyone's talking about.
exactly, geopolitics, natural disasters, even just plain old manufacturing delays, any of that could impact ACME's ability to finish projects on time and within budget.
They're at the mercy of factors outside their control. Always a worry for investors. Any other potential hiccups they've flagged?
They also mentioned the risk of cost overruns. Big infrastructure projects, they have a bit of a reputation for going over budget. And renewable energy is no different.
It's a risky business.
It is. Those unexpected expenses can eat into profit margins quickly.
Speaking of new technology, what happens if some breakthrough in renewable energy comes along and renders their current tech obsolete?
Well, that's the risk you take in a fast-evolving industry, right? ACME acknowledges this in their prospectus. They know they need to stay on top of those advancements.
So agility and innovation are key for staying ahead of the game.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not just brand new tech either. Even existing tech is constantly being improved. Solar panels getting more efficient, wind turbines growing larger, battery storage expanding.
The race to the top.
It is.
Yeah.
But that's also what makes this sector so dynamic.
Absolutely. But let's step back for a second. It's easy to get lost in the numbers, the business side of things, but we can't forget why this industry is so important.
It's about the future, right?
It is.
Renewable energy is about building a sustainable future, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, the ones that are driving climate change.
It's about a cleaner, healthier planet.
Exactly. And that's why companies like ACME, even with the challenges they face, play such a vital role. They're pioneers, innovators, building the energy systems of tomorrow.
Turning that vision of a cleaner future into a reality.
Now, while we're on those challenges ACME faces, I found their discussion of regulatory hurdles and legal battles particularly interesting.
Yeah, right. The real-world complications of operating in a heavily regulated space.
Yeah. And they give specific examples, which I think helps illustrate the points, like there's this case with several ACME subsidiaries petitioning against the Solar Energy Corporation of India Limited and some other entities,
Okay.
all about getting compensation for increased costs due to GST and customs duties.
So even with government support, there can be disagreements.
Oh, for sure. And then there was another case, a civil suit, filed against ACME Solar Rooftop about land ownership.
Land ownership is always a tricky issue.
It is. And these legal battles highlight how important it is to have a strong legal team and to really understand the ins and outs of the regulations.
It adds another layer of complexity to their story and shows just how much they have to juggle.
Yeah, no kidding. Even with the best of intentions, operating in a fast-paced industry like this comes with its share of bumps in the road. But maybe let's shift gears back to the financials for a minute.
Okay, back to the numbers. What else can we learn from ACME's financial reports?
Well, one thing that jumps out is the amount of debt they've taken on to fuel their growth. We talked about how they're planning to use some of the IPO proceeds to pay down those borrowings.
Right. But it's worth highlighting how much debt they're actually carrying. As of June 30, 2024, their total borrowings, including lease liabilities, hit $93,199.14 million.
That's a hefty sum. To really understand what that means, we need to look at net debt. Takes their cash on hand into account, paints a clearer picture of their overall debt.
And how does that look for ACME?
As of June 30, 2024, their net debt stood at $93,496.01 million.
So more debt than cash reserves. What does that mean for potential investors?
Well, it means ACME is highly leveraged. They're using a lot of borrowed money to fund their operations. And that rapid expansion we discussed.
Is that always a bad thing?
It's tricky. Leverage can boost returns. If their investments do well, profits get a nice bump.
The upside.
But it also amplifies the risk. If those investments don't pan out as planned, or if interest rates rise, things could get dicey.
High risk, high reward, classic investment dilemma.
It is. It's something potential investors need to carefully consider. So to recap, we have a company with big ambitions, a lot of debt, and heavy reliance on government support.
But also operating in a booming market with the global push for clean energy behind them and a willingness to embrace new technology.
A lot to unpack.
It's a captivating story, that's for sure. I think our listeners are starting to get a sense of why it's worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And speaking of those captivating details, one thing I found really interesting in the prospectus was the high turnover rate among ACME's senior management.
Oh yeah, the revolving door at the top.
Exactly. They mentioned several execs leaving, including that CFO who stepped down on leap day. It makes you wonder what's happening behind the scenes.
Is it a sign of instability, internal conflicts, or just the demanding nature of the industry? Hard to say for sure, but definitely something to note.
I agree. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, ACME's background, financials, the Indian renewable energy market, but let's bring it back to the individual listener for a minute. What does it all mean for them, even if they're not investors or policymakers?
That's a great point. What's the takeaway for the average person?
I think ACME's story really shows that the energy transition isn't some far-off event. It's happening now, everywhere.
And it's impacting all of us.
Absolutely. The decisions companies like ACME make, the technologies they invest in, the projects they develop, it's all shaping the future of energy for decades to come.
And ultimately, those decisions impact our daily lives, don't they? How we power our homes, how we travel, how we live.
It all comes back to that. So even if you're not rushing out to buy ACME stock, their story is still relevant. It's a story about the future of energy, a future that we're all a part of.
And before we move on to our final thoughts, I'd love to hear what you think about another up-and-coming technology, offshore wind power. India has such a vast coastline. Harnessing the power of offshore wind could be a real game changer for their renewable energy goals.
That's an excellent point. It does raise an important question. Will ACME, with their current focus on land-based solar and wind, be able to make that leap to offshore?
Will they adapt, or will they miss out on this new opportunity?
Only time will tell. But it's something to think about as we move into our final thoughts on ACME and the future of renewable energy in India.
We were just talking about ACME and potentially jumping into offshore wind, and, it really highlights their ambition.
It does. They've got this big vision for renewable energy in India. But big ambition also comes with big responsibility. Turning that vision into reality, that's no small feat.
And we've already touched on some of those challenges, right? Navigating the regulations, that fierce competition, and their dependence on government entities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't forget those borrowing costs. They're a major factor for any company, especially one that's growing as fast as ACME.
Exactly. It's a good reminder for potential investors, Look beyond the excitement around renewable energy and really dig into the company's financials, their risk management strategies.
Due diligence is key. You can't just get swept up in the hype without understanding the details. And speaking of risk management, one thing that really stood out to me was ACME's exposure to currency fluctuations.
Ah, right. The global economy always throws a wrench in the works.
It does. ACME's revenue is mostly in Indian rupees, but they've got significant expenses in foreign currencies,
Hmm.
especially for those imported components.
Right.
So if the rupee weakens against those currencies, it could impact their profits.
Another wrinkle for those investors to consider. But let's zoom out again for a second. We've talked about India's ambitious renewable energy targets, but how does their overall energy mix stack up globally? Are they really leading the pack?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. India's making progress with renewables, but coal still plays a surprisingly big role in their energy mix.
Coal? Isn't that one of the dirtiest fossil fuels?
It is. Major contributor to climate change. And the Crystal Report actually gives us some data on this. As of March 2024, coal and lignite-based power generation made up almost 49% of India's total installed capacity.
Wow, that's a lot. So even with all the progress they've made, India still has a long way to go to ditch fossil fuels. What does that mean for ACME?
Well, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. The continued reliance on coal means there's huge potential for growth in renewables.
Right.
But it also means ACME is going head-to-head with those established coal-based power producers. And those guys, they often have a lot of political and economic clout.
It's a bit of a David and Goliath situation, huh? ACME, this agile renewable energy company going up against the coal industry giant.
You could say that. And the outcome of that fight, well, it's going to have big implications for India's energy future and their ability to reach their climate goals.
It's a good reminder that these aren't just business stories. These are the things that shape the world we live in. But before we wrap up our deep dive into ACME, I always like to leave our listeners with something to ponder, a question that'll stay with them. What do you have for us today?
So we've talked about all the technological advancements in renewable energy, but there's another piece of the puzzle that we haven't really touched on. The human element.
The people behind the technology.
Exactly. Renewable energy projects, especially those massive ones that ACME is building, they need skilled workers.
Yeah.
Engineers, technicians, construction workers, project managers.
That's people who make it happen.
Right. And it makes you wonder, is India's education system, their training programs, are they ready to meet this growing demand for skilled workers in renewable energy?
Or will a lack of qualified people hold back India's clean energy ambitions?
That's the question.
That's a great point. It reminds us that the energy transition isn't just about technology, it's about people, too. It's a social and economic challenge as well.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's what makes this whole topic so interesting. So much to consider.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today. ACME, solar holdings, the Indian renewable energy market, those global trends. It's been quite a journey.
It has. A journey filled with insights. Hopefully our listeners found it thought-provoking.
We encourage you to keep exploring, to keep asking those questions, keep diving deep.
And until next time, farewell from the deep dive.